Just in a couple of days, we were able to spin around, take an R1 model from DeepSeek and essentially run it in our platform in a privacy-preserving way. And we put outside this blind guru that you can talk to and you can confide, your thoughts to. And I think that's an example of the benefits of open sourcing these type of models.
Well, Miguel, welcome back to the Building in Public podcast here. Excited to have you on. There's a lot going on for Nillion. I saw that your team just launched a podcast, so I wanted to jump in on that real quick. Like, what's the motivation behind having a podcast internally, and how's it been so far running your own pod?
Yeah, thanks for having me, by the way. It's great to be here. I think the idea is just to give a mic to the amazing builders that are building products and developing stuff on top of our platform, so that we can give them airtime and feature their products and their projects. I think that's the kind of main idea.
100%. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm seeing a lot of crypto founders and crypto projects launch podcasts, and running a media company. Like, I've seen the benefits of having your own platform and like kind of going direct as a founder, as a project firsthand. So glad to see you guys are taking the initiative there. I also wanted to talk about DeepSeek real quick. I mean, I think the dust has settled in terms of people have kind of figured out what's gone on for the most part, but what's your take on how DeepSeek and them open sourcing their model affects AI development and specifically kind of privacy as it relates to AI chatbot usage? And
yeah, well, on the one hand, DeepSeek as a company has shown not to care much about privacy in a sense, because there were leakages and some security problems associated to that. But then on the other hand, I think open sourcing is great because that it's the first time that a model that performs really, really like top tier level is open source, and I think that enables a lot of playground. It's MIT license, so you can take that and you can actually productize it, and that's where you can add privacy, and that's what we did. I don't know if you saw it, but on Twitter, but we very quickly, yeah, exactly. It was amazing. Just in a couple of days, we were able to spin around, take R1 model from DeepSeek and essentially run it in our platform in a privacy-preserving way. And we put outside this blind guru that you can talk to and you can confide, your thoughts to. And I think that's an example of the benefits of open sourcing these type of models.
100%. I think I saw something similar from Eric Voorhees, right? His like Venice product was allowing people to interface with the DeepSeek R1 model, but
yes,
in a private way.
Yes, I think it's the same concept. The idea is that we've been taught like by large companies that privacy is something that you have to give up if you want to get the latest features and high performance on AI in particular. But this just illustrates that that's not the case. You can get top level privacy and still retain all that performance and still be able to interface with top tier AI models. I think that's kind of the message here.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll definitely want to get into the basic, I guess, like architecture, user flow later in terms of, because I'm sure there's some basically intermediation between the model itself and then the user, and that's how you ensure privacy. But you tweeted that AI agents will need to be trustless and most of them will need to be private. Could you explain maybe both of those things separately, and then also if they relate to each other?
Yeah, in Web3, we are used to thinking about, decentralization, but the trustless nature of it, meaning that you get what it says on the tin. Like, for example, with an AI agent, you run it and you know that it was a certain type of model that was run there and not something cheaper. So you get what it says on the tin. That has been traditionally the most important thing to care about in Web3 when it comes to transactions, because if you're tampered with, if the service is changed, then it means that people can take economic advantage of you. There can be double spending and things like that. So that's why it was the first element of decentralization that was put in place in Web3, but it's not the only one. If you think about what can you give to, in terms of, giving away control, the other thing that you give away is that you lose control of when you give it away is data. The minute you share some important, personal information with someone else, that someone else has now the power to do with whatever they please with that behind your back, and you won't be able to notice. So it is, I would argue, an element as important, maybe in the agentic space, even more important than trustlessness, the privacy stuff. It is very important to retain control of that personal information, even though you're interacting with third-party services, and that is also empowering you, and it's also, I think, part of the decentralization ethos that pursues trust minimization. So it's not just the verifiability aspect of it, it's also the privacy aspect of it. I think that kind of completes the combo.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple angles here, right? Like, I mean, one, it seems like the web scraping of publicly available data is quickly approaching kind of the max of the function in terms of like a lot of the data, or probably most of the data out there, has been scraped. So then like you start to put a premium on private data. But I also think when you talk about a specific user and like an agent and how useful an agent could be to them, it will be most useful when it has the most context about your life. And that means feeding it, text
Everything.
messages, financial
Yes.
information, which, yeah, it's like a trade-off, right? Like you want it to be more useful for you, but at the same time, you definitely don't want that information to get out there. So definitely see where you're going, or where you think things will head in terms of AI agents needing to be trustless and private.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. Yeah, on the one hand, you have these large models which run out of data to train on, and 90% or more of the valuable data is actually private. So now they have this, impediment to continue finding, and making their data sets, training data sets larger. That's number one. But then what touches us more personally and directly is personalized agents. As you say, it's very hard to imagine them becoming useful to us unless they learn about us, right? One example would be an agent that parses through your Telegram messages, helps you organize them, tells you what important things you have there, unanswered, creates groups on the fly, things like that. Even if you don't believe in privacy, because that is your whole life, right? Professional life, and even personal life that you have there. Even if you don't believe in privacy, you're breaching probably legal clauses because there is confidentiality, involved in all those messages. You cannot just share that with a third-party company.
Yeah, that's like the extension of the point that I just made, right? Is like you want to be able to share as much of your personal information with an AI agent as possible to make it useful to you. But in doing so, you're inevitably going to be sharing other people's personal information. And so then there's like NDAs to think about and all of that. Yeah.
So that's a very good example. One tends to think just about the assistants like, therapist or, relationship assistant or financial assistant or tax advisor or, health advisor. And that is your information that is going into the mix. But you also have to think broader and think about those use cases like the Telegram one I mentioned, whereby you're not just submitting your personal data, but also data from other people that is subject to legal agreements. And, you also have to think about them and their privacy as well.
Just zooming out a bit, starting a company is obviously a big endeavor, big goal to have in mind, lots of work that goes behind that. Like, what got you obsessed with privacy and private compute specifically as an idea to build behind?
Yeah, I thought that it was kind of the missing component in Web3. I saw that Web3 was in a sense equivalent to Web1, this initial version of the internet where everything was mostly public. And then if Web2 is the current version of the internet, which is much larger than Web1, though one of the main reasons why it is so is because it was able to deal with personal data. Not in a super perfect way, there's been breaches and things like that, but you do have certain protection against third parties at least. And I would argue that that's one of the major components behind that growth. So being excited as I was about Web3 and decentralization ethos, I thought that was a missing component that was actually preventing Web3 from growing beyond its current limitations. So that's why I was very interested in bringing privacy into Web3.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I hadn't thought about privacy being the thing that took us from Web 1 to Web 2 and how impactful that could be from Web 2 to Web 3, but that makes sense.
Yeah, we kind of lost it, right? When we're going from Web 2 to Web 3, we gained, the verifiability and all that thing, but we kind of lost that main element that is privacy.
Right. Public blockchains and
Yes.
open ledgers and everything else, right?
Which for those use cases are great. Like, don't get me wrong. I think that, having transactions on a public ledger has its benefits. And there's a reason why those were the initial use cases for Web3, because that's one of the few cases where you won't have that public scrutiny available. But usually that's not the case. Usually you stumble upon problems as soon as you get, you deal with end users and their personal data. That's something that is a no-go when you want to, you don't want to put that on a public ledger, for sure.
Yeah, maybe continuing on this privacy and Web3 point. I mean, privacy has been a topic that's been widely discussed. I mean, both in a Web 2 sense, but also in a Web 3 sense for a long time. And especially in the Web 3 world, it seemed like users haven't cared too much, or it's been difficult because of like regulatory or like political kind of issues. But I think a lot of those things are changing now. Like the Tornado Cash sanctions were overturned. So how is Nillion planning to change the game here in terms of, not making users care about privacy, but maybe making it so easy that they don't have to think about it? Like, yeah, what are you guys building, and how does it play into this whole kind of privacy Web3?
That's a very good question. So yeah, from the Web3 perspective, usually privacy has been thought of as being privacy pertaining or relating to transactions, but it's so much more than that, right? It's not just about Zcash or Monero or the likes of it. Privacy is the thing that enables you to broaden the design space, as I said before. But now, to answer your question, I'll give you one example, which is AI agents. So it is true that maybe the end user doesn't care about privacy, well, maybe just indirectly. And what we want to do is to bridge the gap that exists, between the usability and performance and privacy on the other hand. So we want to make it really easy for developers to use privacy. And the example with AI agents is that we want to integrate a series of privacy-preserving actions in agentic frameworks, so that it becomes a no-brainer for agent developers to actually use those actions. Behind the hood is actually using Nillion and all the privacy that you get from that. But even the developer doesn't need to be aware of that, because it looks and feels just like any other action. And you can build agents on top of that. So the end user doesn't know that all the data is protected by Nillion. The developer may not even know that, but actually by using those actions, you have the guarantees that all data is protected. And one action could be, for example, just store private thoughts from the agent, that those thoughts might be, leaking information from the end user that is interacting with the agent, or maybe another action is private inference, running the agentic logic, but in a privacy preserving way.
For sure. So that's interesting. So in terms of your like point of integration in the AI agent world, you're thinking about going after kind of like the launch pads and the frameworks themselves and integrating at that level versus the developer level, or even versus like the end user agent level. So then it's kind of like privacy by default.
Exactly. It's like you don't even think about it. You just use it. It's not an option not to use it. And we just the way it should be, right? And just to expand on this concept, we have the notion of SDKs. Now moving beyond agents, we have the notion of SDKs, so that you have an SDK for signatures, so that when you sign transactions, you don't even think about privacy, but you're actually distributing the private key across multiple nodes, so that no one has access to your private key, and you're able to sign transactions. Same for data analytics, so you can store and then run analytics on data without even revealing that data, and so on and so forth, for different domains and different applications. And those SDKs have the same look and feel as a standard SDK, even from Web 2. It's just a number of endpoints that you hit and you get the service back. And all the complexity from privacy enhancing technologies, which is admittedly very, very complex, is hidden behind that easy to use interface.
Makes sense. I know you guys are building human to agent secure communication layers, but I think you're also building agent to agent secure communication layers. So maybe talk to me a bit about the difference between the two and where you're at in terms of kind of product readiness on both.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So it might surprise some people to know that already roughly 50% of internet traffic is between non-humans. It's just bot to bot or system to system. So the future is going to look like is going to increase even more, right? So we have to think about the security of agents because they're going to be our proxies and they're going to be manipulating our personal data. And, one thing is to make decisions for yourself about your data. You may trust yourself to do that, but think about, you have to think very carefully when you give personal information to an agent and the decisions that that agent will make about whether or not it will communicate that information to other agents that are even further away from you. So the thing gets very complicated, and the way to solve that is not to share any information in the first place, right? So that's why we're building this secure communication layer between agents that enables them to exchange messages in a privacy-preserving way. So essentially, every agent has like a database with a different schema, and they can decide, or you can decide actually, which parts of that database is subject to be exchanged with other agents. Of course, depending on the purpose. Like one, it makes sense, for example, for a tax advisor to communicate with an agent advising on your finance, but it doesn't make sense for them to contact with a health agent, right? So that is the principle of data minimization that we want to enforce in a very simple way, so that you have a world where you have agent swarms and not everyone is sharing everything with everyone, but actually following those same principles, and everything is built on top of this secure vault, which is what we call it, which is this way first to allow agents to store their thoughts and their data in a privacy preserving way, but second, to enable them also to exchange messages and information in a privacy preserving way that you can also enforce. You can also audit, and you can make sure that they're not just leaking information randomly. So I think it's like, okay, it's not just me with my data, it's also going to be like agents, which I don't directly control, with my data. So that's like the next level, and it requires a new type of infrastructure, which is what we're building.
Yeah, so the core of your agent-to-agent communication framework sounds like share nothing initially from agent to agent, and then kind of have role-based access controls depending on the type of agent and whether you've approved them to share data or not.
And there's a second element to that. So one is the privacy element, but also it's been proven that in the agentic flows, there is a very bad success rate. Only 50% of the agentic flows kind of finish tasks. And the reason is because the message gets lost in translation between agents and agents. So if you have a privacy preserving agent that is kind of intermediating those communications and making sure that the message doesn't get lost in translation, because it's kind of checking that the output of one agent has certain level of quality, then the chances are that those agentic flows will end up actually delivering on what they're supposed to be doing. And that's the second aspect of this platform, that we want to increase those numbers and help agentic flows to actually do the tasks that they're given.
That's really interesting. I mean, that's a case where it sounds like increasing privacy actually has like a secondary utility, which is pretty important, which is like increasing the efficacy of agent-to-agent communication by having kind of like an overseer kind of middleman who's ensuring like data privacy, and that data is only shared between agents that should be receiving it, but also like ensuring that
that's exactly right.
Task flow is finished.
And now you're starting to see privacy as an enabling factor, not just like a nice to have feature, but it's actually something that enables you to do things that you couldn't do before, right?
Super cool. So obviously you guys are going to keep building and try to make this future a reality, but what else needs to happen or would be like a nice to have in this world to get to us to a place where Nillion and private computing is kind of like the default in the tech stack? It could be regulatory, it could be economic, just anything that would help broadly.
I think one important missing piece, well, actually it's been developed now, but an important piece is the one that connects private data in Web 2, which is the majority of high value data, as I said before, like all the values there, with Web 3. And that the core technology there is ZkTLS, which enables you kind of to build a verifiable path, like proof of provenance between Web 2 and Web 3. It's kind of an extension of Oracle. So if you think about oracles, they were moving public data to public data on chain in a verifiable way. Then ZkTLS is moving also private data, but now to public data. You kind of create a zero-knowledge proof, and that becomes now publicly available on the ledger. And we're working now towards the extension of that, which is to end up with secret shares or with secrets with kind of encryption or ciphertext. But you can build a verifiable path down to Web 2. So I can prove to you that this is a ciphertext or a secret share from my bank account balance, for example, as I got it from my bank in Web 2. And that opens it kind of allows the flood of information, of useful information from Web 2 to come into Web 3 and to compute on it in a privacy-preserving way. I think that's going to be a major transformative change for Nillion and for other blind computers, because it's going to now enable you to run all those computations from useful Web3 data, but on a decentralized infrastructure. And one example of that would be, for example, credit scoring. For under collateralized lending, you want to be bringing not just your sources from crypto, your assets from crypto, but also actually your Web2 assets to have a loan with good conditions. But you need to be able to prove that actually those are really your assets. It's coming from your bank account. It's coming from all the different services that you have in Web2. So there's just one example of new use cases. And I think that's a major component, building that verifiable bridge between Web 2 and Web 3 for things like the blind computer, Nillion's blind computer, to continue, in its path towards, growing larger and larger and unlocking more use cases.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I've been hearing a lot more about ZkTLS, and I'm very bullish. Is that a part of the tech stack you guys would be looking to build out, or is that a part of the tech stack you want to partner with existing companies on?
Both. So yeah, we're building on that and in collaboration with other companies which are already in the space. That's number one. Number two, the way we see this kind of thing, because the problem with ZkTLS is user friction. You typically need to install an extension or use a different browser. So the way we see this typically is as a slider, where you can on the one extreme you have TEs just doing that and then providing you with an attestation that they were actually contacting the server and providing you with information they got from the server. And on the other end, you have like the super secure solution, MPC, maybe FHE, like using like top of the class privacy enhancing technologies. But we see a slider there because maybe you want something in between. So we're building that type of infrastructure. One where you can actually decide, okay, I want it to get closer to TEs because I need something with low friction and it needs to be fast, or I need something closer to the MPC world because I need it to be really secure, depending on the type of information and use case. And we're doing the same for private inference on AI. So that you can have on the one stream private inference just running on a TE, and on the other hand, on the other extreme, you have everything running on MPC, and in the middle, you have an in-between that we're also kind of actually exploring with Meta.
Gotcha. Yeah, we actually run the podcast for the Opacity guys. So yeah. I've learned a good bit about ZkTLS and what they're building. Could you explain a bit more about the two ends of the spectrum? Because it seems like they're obviously different, but from my understanding, the typical kind of like user flow is to sign in with your username and password, and that's kind of the authentication mechanism. So maybe explain to our listeners a bit more about like what the two ends of that spectrum mean between FHE and MPC and TEs.
Yeah, in the MPC spectrum, you have to the TLS, like the Web2 server doesn't have to do anything, which is the beautiful thing of ZkTLS. But you do need to replace the client side of that TLS connection with a network of an MPC network of nodes. So you need to bring in a notary. Usually it's two-party computation, but it might be more than two parties. That means you have to you have to actually, be involved in the TLS communication, in the shake, handoff and all the different phases. And that requires you to dive deep into the protocol layer, which requires you then to install a browser extension or to change the browser to use a special browser that supports that, as opposed to just regular, browsing. On the other end, you can use a TEE essentially as a proxy for the website. So essentially, you can even see it as an iframe that runs on your browser. And the TEE is actually doing the connection, the TLS connection with the server, but it's kind of forwarding you all the information so that you have the impression that you're actually interfacing with the server directly. And then the TEE is providing you with an attestation that says that data actually came from the server. So that doesn't require any installation, right? Any special software. It's just regular browsing on an iframe or something like that, which is like the other end of the spectrum here in terms of user friction. Usually the trade-off is between performance and security. In this case, is more a trade-off of user friction, of usability and security. But that's what it would look like for an end user, those two streams.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of, maybe the demand side for your technology, right? Like, what are some of your favorite ecosystem projects or just projects that are building using Nillion?
I think an interesting one is DeepSeek, where you have, people bringing in information from their wearables about their sleeping habits and, all the sport that they do on all that information, putting it together and then allowing third parties to run, queries and obtain insights without actually sharing the information with them, both for research purposes as well as also for financial ones. So some companies might be interested in targeting certain users that, have a combination of data points in that space. That's something very, very interesting because you store in a decentralized platform, which is NilDB, and then you're able to run those queries in a privacy-preserving way. And I think that's very exciting. Another one, obviously, is the agentic stuff, not just the agents, but also in more generally speaking, also the privacy-preserving part. The LLM part. So running models in a privacy-preserving way. And then in DeFi, you have also interesting things. So, for example, encrypted order books or private auctions or private trading policies. And the example that I brought before, which is under collateralized lending, something that is only possible when you bring in information from the outside world in a verifiable way. I think those are all interesting use cases. And then more in the Web 2 space, a set of or a pattern of use case that I think is very interesting is one that allows organizations to collaborate for the first time. So usually they are in a compete mode. For example, banks are competing, telcos are competing, but there are also benefits to collaborating as long as it doesn't require them to exchange information. So with this technology, they can do that. You can have a network, for example, of banks fighting fraud, detecting fraud patterns that can only be seen when you actually put together the information from different ends of the transaction, from the sender and recipient, because it's actually the combination of of those two data points that enables you to see the pattern. But you do that without actually, requiring the banks to share information. And you mentioned before regulations. That would be a space where this technology enables you to run those advanced queries without breaching regulations. In this case, bank secrecy regulations or data protection regulations. And the same applies to every industry. Think about also supply chains. It's the same. You can coordinate all the different companies in a supply chain to make it more optimal, but without having them to share information, which is something that would be against, because it kind of breaches confidentiality agreements and it has to do with competition and so on.
Cool. Well, last question for you. What are you most excited for in 2025 in terms of Nillion, but maybe just even the space in general? AI is obviously going through a lot of pretty crazy developments right now. Crypto as well. What are you excited for in 2025?
Yeah, I'm very excited about AI. I think it is the tech that puts in perspective how important privacy is. Like it's black and white. Now it becomes evident that it's not only a nice to have, it's also a must have, and enables many use cases that before were not possible. And what I think that is interesting about AI is to look at Web 2 as kind of the next step that will enter Web 3. I think Web 3 is kind of a little bit lagging behind Web 2 in this space in particular. So what Web 2 is going to be about in 2035, I think it's robotics. So I'm very excited about that. Obviously, it's super sensitive when it comes to privacy, because now you're going to have a device in your home like constantly seeing and processing everything that it sees. And it opens up very interesting questions around privacy. But I think it's like the next iteration of agents is like they're going to be physical. They're going to have a physical presence. And I think I'm very excited about that, unraveling like first in Web 2, and then I'm sure it will come to Web 3 sometime in 2035. So I'm really excited about that. And then more in general, so we are approaching the end of an interesting cycle, but I'm excited about Nillion because we're launching a token very soon. I cannot give you a date, but it's going to be imminent. And that's something, of course, that after so many years, it's been 3 years in the building, that makes us really, really excited about, and we're really looking forward to that moment.
100%. Well, if you had a call to action for our audience, where would you want to point them to get involved in your community or learn more?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is to go to our website. On the top right, you will see different handles. If you're a developer, you can go to the Telegram or Discord groups. If you are more interested in kind of general news, I think X is a good place to start from. And also we have a wealth of links, useful links, like, for example, docs.nillion.com gives you examples to all the documentation for developers, and masquerade.nillion.com also gives you some examples, some ideas on how to use our platform. So I would do that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Miguel, thank you very much for coming on.